Welcome to this joint UNDRR-UNITAR high-level dialogue and launch of the online course of the checklist on scaling up disaster risk reduction in humanitarian context. Allow me to extend the warm welcome to our panelists that are here to the right and to the left in the room in Geneva, but also all the online participants. We have more than 1,500 registration, also even participants, so welcome to all of you online. My name is Sandra Amlang. I'm UNDR's head of the Interagency Cooperation Unit, and I'm happy to be the moderator for this session. And the Interagency Cooperation Unit also deals with the UN system on topics on risk-informing development, humanitarian, and peace-building efforts. Before we go to the substance, please allow me to share with you some key housekeeping information. One is this is a hybrid event. So both taking place online. You are connected, most of you connected to Zoom, but also here in Geneva at the UNITAR headquarters. And thank you for hosting the event. And then also, I would like to inform everybody that this event is recorded and will be made available on the UNITAR and UNDRR website after the session. And you can please also share who is joining today in the Zoom chat. And the last information I would like to share, very important, we have sign interpretation, as you can see on the screen, and we also have different channels that you can choose. We have a French, Spanish, Arabic, and Russian interpretation, and you can choose at your convenience at the bottom of the Zoom. With this, I just want to speak very briefly on the focus of the session. One, we will launch the checklist online training that has been made available. And also this checklist has been developed in 2019 with UNDRR effort and OCHA, but also many multiple partners that are also supporting the rollout. It has been piloted for 2 years, and we have now a checklist 2.0. And this is available also on the website along with the different training material. And now with this new online option, with the self-paced option, we very much hope that we can reach much more experts that can benefit from this training. Today's event will have a space to exchange knowledge, good practices, and strategies on why and how to make risk reduction considerations more integral in humanitarian planning and programming at global and especially also at national level. This session has 3 sections. One is a high-level section where we can gladly welcome the heads of the organizations of UNITAR and the UNDRR. The next session will go into how do we actually apply the checklist, how it has been applied, what are the future plans, what partners are involved. Here also big thanks to all the partners and member states that are supporting the rollout of the checklist. And finally, we want to encourage everybody to sign up, and we'll provide a brief overview on how to enroll. With this, I would like to go into the first session immediately, and would like to invite our first high-level speaker, Mr. Nikhil Seth, the UN Assistant Secretary General and the Executive Director of UNITAR. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, for moderating the session. And whenever I do something with UNDRR and with MAMI in particular, it gives me great pleasure because we are neighbors here. Some of you out there in our digital space may not know, but the World Meteorological Organization is host to 2 other entities. One of us is UNITAR on the 3rd floor, and the other is UNDRR on the 4th floor. So it always gives me great pleasure that someone who is a friend and someone we work very closely is part of our joint efforts in so many areas. If you look at the lexicon of words in the UN, especially the definitions around disaster, I feel very sad that over the last 5 years, the definition of disasters is getting bigger and bigger. And what we see every year is a new kind of disaster that strikes humanity. And if this is a secular trend that we are going to see over the next so many years, it's going to be a real tragedy for humanity. And now today, it's the launch of a special course, a checklist on scaling up DRR and humanitarian action. And humanitarian action is, after all, action which is spurred by all kinds of disasters. and that list is growing longer. The number of wars and conflicts, human atrocities on other humans is becoming longer. What's happening in the Sahel, what's happening in the conflict situation around the world, what's happening in Latin America and the Caribbean in the context of drugs and homicides. And I was told that the number of murders, gun-related murders in Latin America region, it may not be fall into a definition of a humanitarian disaster, but the number of deaths that are taking place which are gun-related are more than any hot war going on anywhere in the world. So we are in a very, very tragic world in terms of security, in terms of conflict. And I'm so glad that you joined us from the IOM, because one of the consequences of all this disruptive things that are happening around us is the plight of millions of people running away from these situations, who are sometimes called refugees, who are sometimes migrants, called migrants, is becoming really, really severe. And I read, I'm not sure if the statistic is accurate, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the 100 million people over the last year or so have left their home countries to either become migrants or refugees in other countries. And much of this is symbolic of this world that we currently live in, and the trajectory on wars and conflicts that our little world has taken. COVID-19 made more evident the risks that communities face. All communities are at risk of emergencies and disasters. And as I said, the disasters now include more and more types of things that are happening to humanity. Health, economic, political, societal consequences of these hazards are uniformly devastating. No country, how rich or how poor, is exempt from these kinds of disasters that are befalling our human race. UNITAR have collaborated with UNDRR to offer a series of training courses aimed by strengthening the capacities of local governments. And here I just wanted to mention that the SDGs, and I was very deeply involved in the creation of the SDGs, and at that time we all felt that the SDGs belong to some central government, they belong to federal ministries, they belong to big honcho bankers, they belong to leaders of universities, leaders of business, leaders of academia. But no, SDGs actually belong at the local level, and they belong especially to municipalities, to areas of governance where the quality of our life is determined. And working with local communities is where I personally think the action is when it comes to disasters too. Unless you strengthen the capacities of local management in handling disasters, enhancing them only in the context of the central government or federal government or the titans of the kind of people who are involved in disaster relief, I think it is not enough. And how do we get to these local communities? And what is the checklist on scaling up DRR in humanitarian action, and especially humanitarian action and all the action we see by these energetic and diverse humanitarian actors is mostly done, if not all done, at the level of the community. 1 out of 23, I have this staggering statistic here, 1 out of 23 people globally need humanitarian protection and assistance. Global humanitarian operations bring aid to 250 million people in 69 countries. These crises cannot be prevented, and the suffering associated with the impact of these shocks and disasters can be greatly reduced through strong, proactive, and collaborative risk-informed analysis and programming. Mitigating risks can ultimately help alleviate humanitarian demands. We are aware that operationalizing DRR in humanitarian crisis settings is challenging, given the context where it has to take place and complex specificities of each special humanitarian situation. The online tool we launched today is a starting point aimed at assisting relevant actors in adopting a risk-sensitive approach when preparing humanitarian needs overviews and subsequent humanitarian response plans. Through our collaboration, we look forward continuing furthering our capacity building efforts in support of these communities. We are the institution who pride ourselves in the expertise around pedagogy and methodology of learning. We feel that because of our experience in this field, transmitting knowledge is our forte. So when we team up with an organization like yours, Mami, content providers, the expertise on certain types of issues around disaster risk, we hope that this marriage of expertise in teaching and learning and pedagogy and methodology will help convey your messages that you have learned from your experience and your fundamental knowledge on content on many of these issues. So I hope this kind of collaboration, including in other areas, will bear fruit, which we will be able to share with the world at large, so desperately in need of learning on so many of these issues. So thank you, and back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much for these welcoming remarks. Mr. Seth covered a lot of topics, starting off with the systemic nature of risk, which we all are now aware of after COVID-19, going to the importance of the SDG implementation, especially at the local level, and the specific context that you need to look at. And that's also what the checklist is doing. When you go work in the country or the local community, what are the needs and what are the risks, etc., involved in that? And also, very importantly, the purpose for today, also sharing the knowledge and transmitting the knowledge to the right people. With this, I would like to hand over to Mrs. Mami Mitsuturi, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction and Head of UNDRR.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and thank you very much, Nikhil, for your very, very pertinent words at this important time that we are launching together. And this is the important part, that we're all doing this in cooperation, launching this e-learning course, which will be a great course mechanism for development workers, humanitarian workers, peace builders, and it is really important that we have done this together. Now, warm welcome to all of you to this dialogue, to everybody who's in this room, but also online. I see at this moment close to 300 people joining us, which is very encouraging. But I'm not surprised. And why? Because this is a module, this is an e-learning course that we definitely need at this time. Nikhil already spoke about the staggering number of people who need humanitarian assistance. I also want to share with you some other figures. One, that as of June of this year, the global humanitarian needs are 18% higher than only the year before. But there's another figure which is very worrisome, that only 20% of the total required funding for this year has been provided by donors. And this is not because donors are not generous. Donors are generous, but it's because of all the crises, all the disasters that, again, Nikhil has shared with us that is happening. The frequency, the intensity of these crises are becoming larger and larger. And on one hand, you have the climate emergency that drives people into poverty, that drives people into humanitarian needs, and drives people out of their homes and villages. But on the other hand, you have conflicts that are still there, and sometimes, or many times, these two issues, the conflicts and the disasters created by climate-related events, they intertwine. And so we have now a very difficult situation where what we call the fragile context and protracted crisis is becoming much bigger in terms of number, but also the coverage of this world that we live in. And this is why I remember quite even a few years ago, we started to work on this checklist for scaling up disaster risk reduction in humanitarian action. It started as an exercise bringing together humanitarians in the UN system, in the civil society organizations, in governments. We had a very important meeting. I remember on a cold day here in Geneva before COVID, where we all came together to establish this checklist. And then after that, together with UNITAR, we made training modules for the policymakers, for the practitioners, again, in all those sectors that I mentioned, and in all those different areas of the society. And today, now, again, with a very, very important collaboration with UNITAR, this training module has become an online self-paced course, which is freely available to everybody, wherever they are, through UNITAR's website. And Nikhil already shared with us the importance about learning and teaching. This is becoming more and more important, and luckily we have more ways to engage more people in order to learn, in order to teach. And this is exactly what we're doing today. Now, if I may say one thing that we want this e-learning course to achieve is this. We need to first prevent that risks become disasters. That is most important. We need to be more preventative. We need to be more prepared. But even sadly, after disasters happen and when we are responding, we can do a lot in order to prevent future disasters. And this is exactly what this course will teach you. When we are involved in humanitarian activities, this is a very important moment when we do not create more risks, that we put in measures that can prevent further risks. And if we can do that, then we are on the path of prevention. So we need to embed, as we always say, risk-informed policies and activities and decisions into all our activities, humanitarian development, peace building, throughout. And I would like to see, and I'm confident that this e-learning course will be accessed by all those people who are involved in these sections, so that, yes, we can start reducing risk, we can start reducing the intensity and frequency of disasters, and we can narrow that gap that we see now between the humanitarian needs, the colossal humanitarian needs, and what we can provide. So thank you very much, and I look forward to listening to all the experts during this important launch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Mitsutori. Mrs. Mitsutori already explained very well the importance of partnership. This is how she started off, and this is also how we actually implement all of what we are doing. And this is also a good introduction to the to our panel discussion. And I think one thing she very much highlighted is the prevention of risk and the reduction of risk, the importance that it doesn't come to a big disaster where we cannot avoid everything. This is also something highlighted in the midterm review of the Sender framework that was also endorsed in the political declaration, the key elements that we as a UN system, but also all partners have a big chance, governments have a big chance to move forward in the next 7 years. And this can be only done in collaboration. And I think that's also what Mami said, we need to come all together from the different sectors, from the different spheres, etc. And there's a great opportunity. We would like to now closing the thanking again for the opening remarks, our principals that joined us today. I would like now to introduce the first panelist, which is Mrs. Annette Hearns, the Deputy Head of Office Policy from the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, known as OCHA. She joins us from online from South Sudan. And she will speak on the application of the checklist that has been done, undertaking by partners in the lead of OCHA in 2022, and also talks about related next steps. So what has been learned based on the application? How does South Sudan integrate disaster risk reduction in the humanitarian planning? Welcome, Mrs. Sands.
Thank you so much. So good day and greetings to everybody, and thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'd love to be able to take the credit that OCHA led on the application of this checklist. We were students in the room, along with our fantastic, very hardworking colleagues. But we were actually blessed in South Sudan to have some dedicated UNDRR colleagues who joined us. So our experience in adopting and applying the checklist was extremely positive. But I have to say, a large part of that was also because we did have this dedicated support. And we had that for some time, not just on the humanitarian side, but the same individual then literally working across the bridge of Nexus with our development colleagues. So I think the first thing for us that we were able to optimize and capitalize on as the checklist then became real was that existing relationship and synergy that they were able to build for us to then help bring us all into the room. And look, as humanitarians, we all get a little bit kind of, this is my space, and sometimes we forget to leave. And that to me was one of the most important things. By working together in that collaborative manner, in the same space with the same people, but bringing kind of different expertise and different abilities to impact, how and where then can we optimize what it is we're able to do together? So our application was very much framed then in how the UNDRR colleagues were able to enable those bridges. But let me take a step back. South Sudan, on the humanitarian side, what is it that we're here trying to support? So if you look at the 2023 Humanitarian Response Plan, high-level figures, total population 12.44 million. When we then went out and gathered data based on need and applied our criteria, 9.4 million people found to be in need. 9.4 million people of 12.44. I come from a country that we're very proud we've just reached 5 million. So 2 times the population of my whole country in need. So then for the humanitarian country team to prioritize, the decision was made to prioritize 6.8 million people. Today, we're funded at 46%. It's an impossible task. So the embracing the, making sure that we are working with the colleagues who can mitigate and prevent the suffering and really bringing ourselves together around that. That's what our engagement and our sense, both with the tool, but also then with the engagements with UNDRR brought about. So let me get down then to some of the facts and figures. So people in South Sudan then suffer from multiple, often interconnected shocks. And what we have is similar to what Mami and Nicole said, where people experience one shock and it then becomes a multiplier because other things come in. The interconnected nature of elements like insecurity, driven by competition for resources because of the impact of climate change. So what we were able to do then in terms of the tool, drawing from the work that UNDRR had already been able to do, leveraging the risk information exchange, the RICS, which we love and use pretty much every single day, we were able to bring down and kind of hone in on, what are those categorizations of risks? So, the hazard, the exposure, the vulnerability, but really then to hone it down in terms of our risk areas. And of course, with South Sudan, that's biological, hydrological, environmental, political, climate change, etc. we worked then with the intercluster team, and we had an expanded membership of that with lots of the technical experts, including colleagues who worked on Nexus, across the Nexus, and from the recovery and development side. And the culmination was where we were able to bring together, with more than 40 people in the room or online in a workshop, to be able to really kind of nut out. So we have the framework, we know where we need to be. What does this really mean for us? What is our shared understanding? And that information then was able to be used concurrently when on the development side of the house, the common country assessment was being done. So it was like a pre-profiling. So one exercise, multiple uses. So then taking the step further, we were able to do kind of a light touch interagency diagnostic with the action plan to then be able to scale up by applying the checklist here for the South Sudan context within the humanitarian confines. The feedback we've received is that the common country assessment now is a much stronger reflection in a more holistic way in terms of the impact of shocks and their likelihood on real people, not on numbers in a cell, in a matrix of an Excel. It's really bringing that human dynamic, that person-centered. You know, this is a child, this is a human being that somebody loves. So that's been one of the most profound pieces of feedback that we have received. What did we learn? Lots. And sadly, let's start with funding. What we learned is that all the energy, all of the efforts, all the documentation and the good intention does not necessarily translate into action if it's not funded. And the dynamic of having either limited or very time-bound short-term funding, that impedes and almost makes, it kind of forces us into almost piecemeal action. But it also, it kind of drives the more reactive side. And that's one of the most important things we learned. As the humanitarians, we are locked in reaction, reaction, reaction. We need to consciously shift our mindset and embrace the opportunities around early warning, early action, anticipatory action, but then offsetting and mitigating, preventing human need is very difficult to sell. How do you prove a positive? When something didn't happen because there were action, that's always then a loop we get into, and that's something we kind of challenge ourselves around. But there's very little funding when it comes to, you know, what's necessary for preparedness and contingency planning. But also there are funding opportunities. It is we who also need to adjust how we're working and framing things to better be able to access all of those. There's competing priorities. Everything is a priority, therefore nothing becomes a priority. We've limited engagement with and by authorities. And I use the word authorities because, with respect, in countries such as this, government does not mean the same thing for various different communities at the grassroots level. And that is where we do need to go. But we also need then the leadership. We've poor alert and early warning mechanisms. So then it's again that reactive nature. Something happens, how and where do we get that? We have very little engagement with the affected population and the community on this. So engaging with them, which of course must be the hub of our process, to learn and benefit from their indigenous knowledge, but also to preserve and to respect that, to hear their priorities and then respond according to those elements and engage with them so that they understand and we can meet and manage expectations. And our next learning was we have limited capacity, but then also we have that cohort of population that we're not capitalizing on. So a lot of what we have tried to see where we have the opportunities draws across those elements in terms of what it is we want to do and need to do. So let me just give you some highlights then in terms of what we have done. We've constant and ongoing engaging with government. Literally, my head of office and the acting HC are just back from a meeting with the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, where we repeatedly, constantly, and frequently return to the requirement that the provision of services is the responsibility of any one government, and we are here to support, and therefore that contribution. But also drawing attention to the breadth of suffering and what does that actually mean in regards to the application of this. We definitely have more conscious alignment when it comes to risk. When our DRR colleagues arrived, if you said the word risk in the intercluster room, everybody's head went to shock. Now there is a true understanding. I'm beginning to get inputs for our humanitarian needs overview and humanitarian response plan. I am so proud of the colleagues. You see a conversion of knowledge now that is reflected in practice, in action, and in narrative. We've adopted, where possible, interoperable approaches. So right now, the data that's being collected to inform the humanitarian response plan, we dialogued and engaged with development actors to see how could we optimize the engagement with the community to gather data. One data set, many uses. So the application of an analytical framework dependent on the various entities then best benefits people moving outward. We've made very conscious engagement with the affected community. We have a lot more to do. And the other thing we've looked for is solution in crisis. So the hundreds of thousands of people who are currently fleeing back across the border here from Sudan because of that crisis, we see that as an opportunity, and it really has helped to enliven the discussion and the actions required on solutions. We're aligning the timelines for the humanitarian and the development planning, again, seeking synergies for development, really, and again, through that interoperable approach. If the development side are stepping up, needs are automatically alleviated and addressed. So therefore, we would hope to see that over years, we do have that reduction. I'll close now and just to say thank you so much. This is extremely exciting. We are really happy. And as a team, we are, if anybody wants to adopt this and they want some of the pointers, we're here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Turns, for this very rich sharing the experience. So we learned a lot. You talked about lessons learned, but also how in the office actually the experience and knowledge changed. That's exactly, it's not just looking at the checklist, it's really a process that needs to apply it. And as you already rightly said, this takes some time. And it's also good that it was accompanied by expertise from disaster risk reduction community. With this, I would like to hand over to Mrs. Asma Salim, Deputy Regional Representative in Asia Pacific from the International Council of Voluntary Agencies, ICVA. She is also joining us online. Thank you very much for joining. And she will talk about the understanding on the importance of the interconnectedness and the systemic risk, what we already talked about, especially in the humanitarian context, and what opportunities there are for practitioners. Over to you. Thank you very much for joining.
So much. And I am joining from Islamabad, Pakistan, and happy to be here. I know our organization name is a bit mouthful, so we are calling it ICWA as a short, just to make sure that we communicate better. I'm happy to be here and share that our ICWA and also our member have been very much engaged in the first version of the toolkit and also the checklist as well from the Asia Pacific, and very much delighted to be here and share our perspective from the NGO side as well. Just a little bit of introduction of ICWA. ICWA is a global network of NGOs, which consists of 150 local and international organization and local fora as well. In 150, we have membership of 150 across 160 countries. As a network, we aim to have better humanitarian response, and we provide much more focus on the humanitarian space, and we support our members, which is across all over the world, to be able to navigate into the very difficult humanitarian space effectively in a very principled approach, through amplifying their voices, supporting learning exchanges, and enabling them to be a part of different forums, to be able to connect to different thematic areas and things which are evolving across the humanitarian and development sector. I think we don't need to set up the humanitarian context, because Nikhil and Miami already talk about the statistics and the way the humanitarian context has been evolving, and has been the intensity and the frequency has been changing a lot. And thus, of course, we need to be much more smarter in terms of our programming as well. In terms of the complex environment, we see that there are countries which are much more vulnerable now. And according to the World Bank report, it states that how much vulnerability it is, and there were like 15 to 20 countries which are highlighted as the most vulnerable, with of course exacerbating events happening through the climate change as well, and through the things we see, especially in Myanmar, in Afghanistan, specifically in the Asia Pacific context, which I think it's becoming much more relevant for the humanitarian actors to be much more prudent, to have more DRR programming as well. As in terms of our membership and in terms of our members, they are both work in the humanitarian and development side as well. And as we are growing and we understand that the funding is limited, there are gaps in terms of the understanding. The events are becoming so much fast. We keep on evolving, and we understand that there's need to be integration of DRR into the humanitarian response. And we have seen that there are a couple of challenges which has been faced by our members and of course local NGOs as well, which is the silos in which all organizations and different humanitarian development actors are working. Also, it's not just that the implementation side, it's of course coming from the donor side as well, and toward the way funding has been created in different silos. So it is important to kind of have that dialogue as well, to make sure that the silos, the way in the development and humanitarian is working, needs to be broken down, to make sure that we have much more integrated and coherent and complementarity approach toward the response, and which of course lead to the DRR as well. We have seen in the context like in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, and of course in Indonesia as well, that how DRR has much more advanced level because of the success of implementation of the way they had been working in terms of the preparedness and in terms of the response as well. There's another important element which we have seen, and we kind of put this in the challenge as well, that there's this vulnerability of and marginalization of the people which has been increased as well, and the phenomena of leaving no one behind within this dialogue is becoming much more essential. And we believe that, and of course our member as well, to make sure that we do include their voices as well. And like Nanette mentioned in the, earlier in the context of South Sudan, how important it is to be connected with the local communities as well and to be involved them. And we are making sure that the accountability of the affected population has to be at the center of everything we do. In terms of the action, because we are not reinventing the wheel, we do have the existing platforms, we do have existing tools like this e-course and other available resources as well, which enable us to be able to not to reinvent, but just to keep on evolving, and better to be in a humanitarian setting, and better to be in humanitarian and effective response as well. The opportunities we have, especially into the DRR forum for the NGOs, is of course local organizations exponentially have a bigger role as well, to be able to play a part at the local level and very sub-regional level as well. And that's why one of our transformative area within ICWA is localization, where we promote localization and make sure that local organizations do have knowledge and do have access to all this knowledge as well, and to make sure that they implement according to the evolving situation. in terms of the way communities has been totally changing because of the displacement, migrations, and climate refugees as well, we are making sure that the engagement with them is becoming much more higher, much more, and their approach and their decision making in terms of the programming becoming a part of a people-centric approach rather than very much toward the program-centric and organization-centric. So these are some of the opportunities for the local organizations. And of course, as Asia Pacific, because I sit in the Asia Pacific, we know that we do have some networks which has been doing a lot of work. And I think this e-learning course would be very helpful for them to be able to share through their networks as well. And most of, I have seen in the consultation that most of the consultation happen in Asia Pacific as well. And of course, it was Pakistan as well, which has been into the pilot study as well. I think it's the version 1. And I think the studies coming from them is becoming like very practical approach as well. We have seen there are a couple of very strong case studies coming out of the communities as well, where the DRR has been implemented so far. I can see that my time is about to up, but if our colleagues would like to connect with us more about, knowing how our members are working in terms of collaboration, because that's how we actually work as well, through partnerships and through making sure that people are aware of the changing environment as well. And of course, climate is becoming a much more bigger subject, and DRR becoming much more relevant as well. So I think it's important and imperative as well to be able to connect it. Our details are with our colleagues in OCHA as well. But if you would like to reach out to ICWA, please feel free to do so that we can have much more discussion. And if you would like to have much more contextualized examples, we would definitely happy to share with you. Over. Thank you.
To Mrs. Sadam, and giving ICWA's perspective, also representing many other NGOs in this, and also the call to partnership. With this, I can easily hand over to Mr. Nick Bishop, Head of the Unit and Disaster Risk Reduction Officer of the International Organization for Migration, IOM.
Excellent. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm very happy to be with you here today. I'll keep my remarks short because I realize we're a little bit behind time. I'm very proud to be here at the invitation of UNDRR. Also very proud to note that our partnership has grown tremendously over the last 2 years, and I think that's in dramatic recognition of the state of the world with respect to increasing frequency of disaster events, and for my own organization, IOM, in recognition of the scale of displacement that's a consequence of climate change and climate-induced natural hazards. Just last year, there was more than 32 million people displaced by natural hazards and disasters. This year, obviously, everyone has seen the dramatic impacts of forest fires, heat waves, flooding in all geographic areas of the world, and all their devastating impacts. So for our organization, in close partnership with many of the other UN sister agencies that have supported in the development of the training over the last several years, including UNICEF, UNHCR, FAO, OCHA, UNDP, under the leadership of UNDRR, and now with thanks to UNITAR as well. I think the criticality of being able to mainstream disaster risk knowledge, specifically in humanitarian environments, where Annette has adequately pointed out that there are tremendous needs. The Global Humanitarian Response Plan for this year is now seeking $54 billion. Every year we see a major increase in funding needs. And despite the generosity of donors, we're simply unable to deliver. So what's the next step? It has to be establishing cost efficiencies in the system. It has to be, to many of Annette's points about taking on preparedness actions, anticipatory action, early warning, where many of our organizations here are major stakeholders in the Early Warnings for All initiative. It's in trying to save lives and reduce losses and damages. It's in trying to avert, minimize, and address disaster displacement and other forms of climate-induced mobility where people are having to leave their homes. And so really, I think to frame from some of the words that Annette was using, this training is an opportunity. It's a force multiplier in trying to mainstream everyone's risk knowledge. It's also an opportunity to use a tool that is contextually specific, that can be used at a national level, that can be used within a community. Much of what IOM does in terms of our programming on disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation in over 80 countries is really taking place at the local level in an attempt to build community resilience to what comes next. And we're all very well familiar with those challenges. So this training, I think, it's really a profound opportunity, and it's a step along a journey of expanding everyone's knowledge, taking forward at a national level in fragile contexts, opportunities to expand what we know, focus on risks, and look at how we can insulate communities with pre-existing vulnerabilities to exposure to hazards for the benefit of affected persons. And so ultimately what we're trying to do here is provide better, more coherent, integrated programs for climate vulnerable persons. And this training is really one strong opportunity in that respect. I think it's, as was noted, it's available online for free, and perhaps I can close my remarks here and leave time for Sandra and Estrella to provide you with more information on how you can more meaningfully access the training. So thanks very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bishop, for this highlighting the opportunities, but also one of the challenges is financing. I think is also, Annette was talking about this, that we also need to look into, and we are already doing this DR financing in humanitarian context. With this, we would like to close the session and thank again all the panelists, and we would like to briefly run you through the brief presentation on which modules are available. Maybe we can go to the next slide already. I don't need to elaborate a lot because I think it was all said already. So I hope you find very interesting the topic that we talked about and you want to learn more. And please also share it with different partners. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank especially Germany, who was accompanying the process throughout since 2018 and putting it forward. The checklist is also mentioned in one of the ministerial statements on anticipatory action, which obviously gives also political leverage from the G7, and also would like to highlight the support from the United States in this. But now going to the overall objective of the tool, as we already said, it's how can we all work together. So risk informing humanitarian development and peace actions, but also with the actors. So who needs to learn how to do that? This is the right people to look at. That we should be looking at this tool. The course has 6 modules, and I will briefly run through those. The first one is really looking at the fundamentals. What are the concepts of disaster risk reduction? What is the terminology? Do we take that as a basis? Do we speak the same language? The next one looks at the linkages and synergies between the international frameworks. We have the Sender framework. This supports the SDG implementation. We have the climate change. We said already disasters are increasing, and obviously the agenda for humanity and many more. The next module is looking really at the collaboration, setting the context in the humanitarian context, but also looking at the 3-dimension on how can we better collaborate in these different spheres. Then we look at entry points on disaster risk reduction, and here you have in the tool also the different elements, be it from the risk analysis, which was mentioned already, to the financing and other, so resource mobilization and other elements. This will be looked into here, and what are priorities that the country can move forward in a specific context. And then the other modules are really looking into what are the risk factors, pre-existing vulnerabilities, how does this come all together in a nexus context, and then enablers is like how can we build those synergies, how can we come together and act. With this, I would like to invite UNITAR, Mrs. Estrella Merlos, Development Policy Specialist and Associate Head, to ensure that you know how to sign up.
Thank you very much, and it gives me so much pleasure to launch this tool that has been developed in the past months. And also, you will see the last slide with the QR code that can take you to the page where you can register through our website. But I would like to also take the opportunity to thank our colleagues from UNDRR Office for Northeast Asia for accompanying us along the way in the development of this tool. and of course our colleagues here in Geneva who has provided the expert review to ensure that there's consistency and coherence along the content of this tool. And I want to miss the opportunity also to thank my colleagues, especially Ms. Alana Barr, who has coordinated also this effort, and my colleagues here, Evelyn, Sam, and Sorika, who have helped us to make sure that this event happens today. So without further, just happy to leave you this link to register.
There are 48 Q&A, so maybe...
Yes.
I will
so we have give you here the link to access, to register. We have provided in the Q&A in the chat also our contact and email address is very easy, disaster@unitar.org. So you can reach out to us for assistance on how to sign up or others. And we will also look into the questions in the chat. And with that, I pass it back to you, Sandra. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Seth. It just highlighted that there's a big interest also in the chat that we would like to acknowledge. So thank you very much. We have unfortunately not time in the context of the session to address all the comments, but we will look into the comment sections and get back to you. And as Stella already said, there is some specifically to the tool or to the online training. You will find the answers by going to the QR code or the UNITAR email address. With this, I would like to invite Mr. Alex Meya, Division of the People from UNITAR, to deliver the closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And because we have literally very few minutes, 3 minutes or so to close, I think it goes without saying how much we appreciate this cooperation on behalf of UNITAR and my Assistant Secretary General, to the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, our eternal appreciation for empowering us to join forces with you. But here's my message. This is the invitation. I want to echo what my colleague Estrella just mentioned to you. The message has to go to you, the participant. More than 300 of you from very many countries. And the message is rather simple. This invitation should not go to the trash bin. This invitation, I really hope, and I want to motivate you, and I want to call your attention to that. I hope to galvanize you. This invitation is relevant. We need you. We need you to use this resource and resources. There are very many things available at the UNDRR website and now also the UNITAR website, but we need you. Without you, our efforts are rather limited. We don't want to be simply preaching to the choir, as the old adage says. We want to engage with new beneficiaries, with new actors, with new decision makers, with the people listening today. So simply to encourage you to do so. I guarantee you, you won't waste your time. This is very professionally put together, curated. It's based on experience and a track record of UNDRR and several other entities that really deserve our appreciation. But it doesn't happen unless you actually acquire this knowledge, these skills, and you put them to use. We need to join forces. I was impressed by 64 billion as the estimated need for the global disasters response. Both Ms. Seth and Ms. Utori told us why this is an urgency. But in this invitation that I was saying to appeal to you to join us, I want to finish by making you realize that the job cannot be done only by national governments, by international organizations, by organizations on the field, NGOs, of course, at the core of it. It has to be done by local communities. And by empowering local communities, we will see a difference. This course will help us in that regard. And with that, let me finish again, thanking all of you participants and everyone that has contributed to this success today. You are all invited. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much. There's not much to add from my side. Again, call to action. Please share yourself. Please take the training, but also share it with all relevant colleagues to really get the message on the ground, the knowledge on the ground to enhance disaster risk reduction integration. Thank you very much to all panelists, and thank you to the participants. With this, I will close the session. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.